that they don't understand. They start attacking it, and then they try to find, I guess, some way to quote-unquote explain it. And I think that that's where this sort of like mental illness thing comes about. And specifically in the case of gender identity, the folks who made this like a diagnostic or were putting it in as like a mental illness obviously are people who don't understand it. And there was a point where the diagnostic manual had what they referred to as gender identity disorder. And so that definitely didn't help, because the people who were kind of using the phrase like, oh, it's a mental illness, as basically an ableist slur in a way. They don't know the first thing about psychology, but then they felt like they kind of had the ability to be like, oh, well, like even the professionals are saying this. And in the professional realm now, I'm actually a law student, but I'm very close with a lot of social workers. I actually almost went into social work myself. The diagnostic manual now still has what's referred to as gender dysphoria, but there's a lot of advocacy around making it very clear that it's not a diagnosis that's like intended to be negative. It's just kind of a way right now of being able to explain how a lot of transgender and gender nonconforming people feel, that the gender they identify as doesn't necessarily match the sex that they were assigned at birth. Dysphoria is a term that is commonly used by trans people themselves to describe those feelings. And so there's a lot of advocacy now around, as we kind of combat gender-affirming healthcare, that we find that we kind of need this, we need the phrase gender dysphoria as a way of showing that this is a very real experience. And for some people, not everyone, but for some people, they might be seeking out some sort of medical assistance to help affirm their gender. Not everybody does, but for those who do, there are a lot of healthcare barriers. And on that end, the sort of gender dysphoria diagnosis does help. There's also a lot of advocacy and a lot of kind of just stuff in the community about that phrase as a whole, but there's definitely kind of been this more recent progression of it's not a mental illness in this charged, stereotyped way that people will sort of interpret as very negative. It's more that it's kind of like it's a way of explaining internal feelings in a way that allows people to seek out some stuff that they might need to be able to thrive in their authentic identities. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand what you're saying from that. Now, one thing when I was reading up on you and everything that I was surprised about was you had mentioned they were doing some advocacy work in Massachusetts against conversion therapy. I didn't even realize that there were people still trying to do that. Because it seems to me that's just, seems like that doesn't even in work and would not even be a thought to be in the thought of true medical people's ideas, but apparently in certain parts of the state there are still folks that are thinking that you can just turn off a switch and stop having the mindset that you were born with and everything. So I don't see how that would work, but apparently there are folks that seem to have that mindset.
Yeah. So this this dangerous and misguided practice, for lack of a better word, has only been banned through legislation in maybe like half a handful of states, and I believe Washington, D.C., and I've been doing the advocacy around enacting similar legislation here in Massachusetts since about 2010. No, that wouldn't be right. 2013, 2014, something like that. And as I've actually worked in it kind of in multiple capacities. In undergrad, I was an intern at the State House, and the representative I was working for was actually one of the co-sponsors of this legislation, so I was doing a lot of work there. Then I've done a lot of volunteering work and, as a law student, a lot of pro bono work with a great organization, the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition. And so then I was doing the work from a nonprofit angle, and then I also was in the government again in an internship between my first and second year of law school, the Attorney General's office, and the unit I was with wanted to look into this. So I've sort of been doing advocacy work throughout multiple sessions at the State House. It hasn't necessarily been that legislatures themselves are killing the bill. It's sort of just the bureaucratic process of it kind of inches its way to a committee and just dies in the committee by sheer kind of like lack of response on their end, or just other kind of like obstacles that happen in the legislature. But most recently, the advocacy work that I have been doing around that, which I was doing in the Attorney General's office and with the Mass Trans Political Coalition, is I've found that the main issue for state legislatures is that they don't think that conversion therapy is actually something that's happening in Massachusetts. A lot of people who consider themselves more liberal, especially, kind of have a tendency to say, you know, we were the first state to like legalize marriage equality, and we're such a blue state, and all this other stuff. So with that sort of like stereotype about Massachusetts, they can't wrap their heads around the fact this is actually happening. And while it's fair that they kind of say, you know, like, we want to see data on this, the fact of the matter is that there is a very good reason there's not data on it. The people who are doing conversion therapy on young people are very underground. They do not advertise that they're doing it. Those who do advertise anything themselves will often advertise, you know, we love gay people and we just really want to help them. And it's not until that kid is in the room that they find out what their version of helping really is. But there aren't even so many of those. It's a lot of like, I think it's the Massachusetts Family Institute, or, you know, those few conservative groups that are out there. Parents who really want to do this to their children contact those groups, who then hand people off to people who are engaging in this practice. So it's very underground. And then those who have managed to survive conversion therapy, it is just so traumatizing that they are not going to talk about it. So the legislature is like, oh, well, we don't even, see people advertising this. No one's coming out and saying that this has happened. But for all those reasons, we don't necessarily have access to that information. And I've sort of been trying to paint the issue of passing this bill more as I can go on this rant, about why you don't see these things. But if you care about kids, you should just breathe this thing through every committee as a way of saying, even if you feel the need to say, we don't know if this is happening, I truly believe it sends a message to young people that their government actually cares about them. And I think that's astronomically more important right now. I actually just had a mom down in Maryland who has a transgender son who just started college post a status asking, can any adults talk to my son? And I messaged her and I'm like, yeah, tell him to add me on Facebook, give him my number. And she's just like, he's so scared right now because of everything that's happening on a national level. And
that was true.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, that's really the thing that I was curious about, and I wanted to know if you could address both of those, and I'm going to ask them with two separate questions. One is, you did have the young lady that I think at age 7 or 8 identified herself as a transgender, the dancer. And I was just wondering, in your understanding, when did you start identifying that way, and how young do people start identifying in your research and everything? And also, why do you feel that the transgender population is so targeted these days? It seems like when I was reading statistics, it seems like it's become an even more targeted group than it had been in the past.
So Olivia, the dancer, is 6 years old. She's actually going to turn 7 at the end of November. We were joking when we were filming her. We kept trying to get her to remember November 6th, the day of the midterms. And she goes, that's my birthday. And her mom's like, no, her birthday is at the end of November. But we were joking that she should say, that's my birthday. This should be my birthday present. Just thought that you guys might appreciate that. Yeah, so she's 6. For me, I identify as non-binary. I don't identify as a woman or a man. And I'm 24. I first kind of became aware of transgender as a word probably in middle school or high school. But at that time, it was still kind of very binary trans. It was, quote unquote, people who are assigned female at birth who identify as male, or people who are assigned male at birth who identify as female. And I had always sort of not felt comfortable as a girl, but as I became, more aware of transgender identities, when I initially did, because they were so binary, I actually got really upset because I felt like maybe this could give me an answer, but I also knew kind of just instinctively, well, I don't really feel like a boy either. And so it actually wasn't really until college when, just as language evolved, terms like non-binary and genderqueer and agender were more in our vocabulary, that I just kind of finally, around 2020,